Academic failure is exactly why you're about to have the greatest comeback of your life. You think you're bad at school, but you're not. You just have the wrong approach, and anyone can fix that. Let me tell you about the day I learned that lesson the hard way. When I was in high school, I had this dream. I was horribly insecure, and I mean horribly insecure. I had found that I was pretty good at school, and I think that I had used that as a way to cover for my sense of inadequacy, my feeling that I just was not good enough. And I had set it in my sights, more than anything, to go to Princeton University. I had gotten really good grades. I was valedictorian of my high school. I had done everything right, or so I thought. But I did not do very well on the SATs, and I did not get into Princeton. And it was crushing for me. I literally couldn't talk to people for weeks. I mean, literally even now, even just thinking about it, I still get emotional. I couldn't hear about that school for years afterwards without feeling these twinges of inadequacy. And I think a lot of it was because I felt not good enough about myself. This rejection was like the confirmatory evidence that I really wasn't good enough. But here's what changed everything. Eventually, I realized something. Oh, okay, there is a way to actually get good at these tests. Other people are doing something different. It wasn't that I was bad as a person, it was that I was doing something bad. So I set out to really try to figure out what that thing was. And I ended up doing really well, like really well, on the next most important test, which was the MCAT. I scored in the top 1% and then went on to score even higher on an even harder exam, the USMLE Step 1. You've already eliminated most of the bad test takers, right? Again, they're not really bad test takers, but the people that think that they're bad test takers and therefore decide that they don't want to continue. For me to score in the top 0.1% on Step 1 was, for me, a massive achievement, considering that I almost felt like I needed to give up. What I realized is that for me, going from not even knowing that I was supposed to study for these tests to actually being very good at these tests, that this was a transferable skill, and that the process that I had gone through was something that I could teach other people. Now, ladies and gentlemen, how many of you have ever had a goal that was very important to you, and you set out to get it, and it didn't happen the way you planned? Raise your hands. You know what I'm talking about. It's called life. But here's what I want you to understand. That moment of failure, that crushing disappointment, that wasn't the end of your story. That was the setup for your greatest comeback. What are the lessons that you can take from this so that you can have your greatest academic comeback? The first is that you need to reframe failure as fuel. The first thing you must understand is that failure is not evidence that you're inadequate. It's evidence that you're human and you're trying. For me, it was very difficult because I was starting with the premise, I was starting with the underlying assumption that I wasn't good enough. No matter what happened, if I had success, right, I was valedictorian of my high school, I would get good grades on certain tests, I would have other people tell me that I was smart. Because I had started with the assumption that I wasn't good enough, no matter how much evidence that I had, I just rejected it. I said, no, that test was too easy. No, I got lucky. No, it was just because I prepared. And so every single time I had positive things happen to me, it was like it didn't even exist. And then on the flip side, when I would have something negative happen or something that I perceived to be negative, like the Princeton rejection, it was like, oh yes, this is confirmatory evidence that I am not good enough. What you need to remember is that academic failure or failure of any kind is data. It is not destiny. Failure is not your identity. Instead, it's just your information. There's a massive difference between the action or the result, the temporary situation of I failed, versus the identity of I am a failure. In one circumstance, I myself am good enough and I just happen to push myself to a new situation. right? And so anytime you are in a new situation, of course you're going to fall short, because when you are trying to improve yourself, you're going to have times where it's not going to work out the way that you want. When I changed that belief, that instead of thinking, oh, okay, I'm just not good enough. Oh, okay, I am a failure. When I let go of that identity and I adopted the identity of I am good enough, I made the assumption, I made the choice to believe in myself, then I was able to see things the way that they really were. If you think like, oh no, that's just, mind over matter. No, I was still objective with myself. I still didn't get into Princeton. I still did not have an application that was good enough, but it wasn't that application meant that somehow I was not good enough. It just meant that I had not done a good enough job of preparation. I literally did not study for the SATs because I think deep down, I was afraid that if I tried and failed, it would be much worse. That somehow that would be even greater confirmatory evidence that I really wasn't good enough, which was ultimately the thing that I feared more than anything. And so when you change that mindset, when you change that fundamental core belief about yourself, now you have the choice. By making that choice, you now have the ability to see things, to interpret situations, and to see failure as fuel, not as confirmation that somehow you're not good enough. And again, it comes from making a choice at core. But reframing failure and rethinking your core identity is just the beginning. The second thing that you need to understand is that there's always a better method. You're not failing because you're not smart enough. You're failing because you haven't found the right method yet. This is something that I have seen in my own life. I work and I coach students who are many times often very, very, very struggling. Some students are struggling because they've kind of hit a plateau and they're like, I want to get even higher. I want to do even better. And some people are literally on the verge of failing out of medical school. Most academic struggle is method, not intelligence. I'd even go so far as to say that virtually 100% of academic struggle is method and not intelligence. Remember, other people aren't smarter, they just have better systems. This was a major lesson for me, was to see that the students around me that were scoring better on the SATs, they got into better colleges, that were better standardized test takers. Yes, maybe some of them naturally had some proclivities. Maybe some of them were naturally more intelligent than I was. Every single one of them had something that I could take and add to my own approach, that I could use and modify. And so that's what I did. I would ask people who were doing really, really well on standardized tests, what is it that you are doing? How is it that you are reading these questions? I remember I had a conversation with someone who crushed the MCAT. And what he said was, okay, well, every single time I get a question wrong, I have to figure out exactly why it is that I got the question wrong, right? Was it knowledge? Was it a problem of not reading the question correctly? And then I have to understand every single answer choice and figure out, okay, what was the test writer's intent for having it on the test? And why was it included? Right? What made it a reasonable distractor, right? Because usually when test writers are writing questions, if it doesn't distract someone, it's not a good distractor, and therefore they're eliminated, right? So every other answer choice is there for a reason. And so figure out what is that reason why that answer choice is there, and then figure out why does it not make sense? And so every single question that he got wrong was an opportunity for him to get better, both in his knowledge, right? He had to go more in depth to learn it. And in addition to that, it was an opportunity for him to improve his ability to interpret and understand questions. Just this alone was a major breakthrough for me. What I had done was just, I don't know, maybe I'll read the last sentence first. Maybe I'll try to read some answer choices and try to figure out like, oh yeah, I'm gonna eliminate this one or I'm gonna eliminate this one. No, he had a full system, not just of how it is that he was reading questions, but in addition to that, I realized that, oh man, the way that he's reviewing afterwards is massively different from what it is that I'm doing. And his goal is massively different and much more specific than what it is that I was doing. And so you want to find those people. Remember, you can't read the label from inside the bottle. It is extremely difficult, if not impossible, for us to see the things that we're doing wrong without having some kind of outside perspective, without comparing what it is that we're doing. And again, that doesn't mean that you have to adapt and make this sort of Frankenstein plan, right? one mistake I see sometimes is it's like you go and you ask 10 different people what it is that they're doing, and you just blindly follow what all 10 people are doing. No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is that you need to go deep and figure out what exactly the best people are doing, and try to figure out, is it that they're being successful because of what it is that they're doing? Or is it because they're just being successful despite maybe what it is that they're doing? And really, really wrestle with that question. But ultimately, the question that you're trying to figure out, how can I take the most transferable skills, the things that work best for other people, and how can I make that a part of who it is that I am? How can I improve my method? How can I have the best, most reproducible method so that when I read a question, I have the highest chance of getting a question correct? And once you have the right method, the third thing becomes possible. The third thing is you want to use your story to serve others. Remember, your comeback isn't complete until you help someone else make theirs. A friend once told me that the best people to learn from are the ones who are not naturally good at something. Instead, they're the people who sucked at it to start and then eventually got good. Because the people who sucked at something to start and eventually got good, they had to learn all of the individual steps in order to be good, right? They weren't it's like, if I want to learn how to get a lot of dates, I should never go to someone who is just really, really, really just charming and attractive naturally. That's probably not a transferable skill. Instead, I want to go to someone who is kind of awkward looking, who doesn't necessarily speak particularly well, who initially had a horrible time trying to get dates, but eventually, through effort and reflection and created a system, eventually was able to get a lot of dates with people that they wanted to have dates with. It's the exact same thing with pretty much anything. And so, if you are struggling right now, remember that your mess becomes your message. The fact that you have an academic failure, the fact that you are struggling right now, actually gives you a remarkable opportunity, and I would even argue responsibility. And that's one of the things that I told myself as I was going through my struggles was, if I can take my struggles, if all of the nights that I spent crying, if all of the struggles and all of the shame that I felt anytime I met someone who went to an Ivy League school, and I could use that to make even just one person's life better, that would make this worthwhile. And having that meaning, both during the time that I was struggling, during the time that I had to overcome all of these limiting beliefs, all of these struggles that I had, helped me to overcome those things. And in addition to that, even afterwards, has helped to propel me to be someone who has devoted my life to help people to make the same kind of transformation. Because ultimately, you want to, teaching what it is that you've learned will multiply your impact. You don't want to take those lessons and just hold them in for yourself. Now I want to go to your questions. So these are questions that we've compiled through comments, through people that I've coached, and just in general about how to have your own academic comeback. The first question is, how do you deal with the shame of academic failure? Ooh, that's a good question. When I had my academic failure, and frankly, I've had plenty of academic failures, not just this one, but we'll focus on this one. I felt so much deep shame. Again, remember, guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is I am wrong. And I really was feeling shame. I really did feel like I am wrong. I am bad. I am not good enough. I think one of the most important things for me when I was dealing with that academic shame was, first of all, to separate out shame from guilt, right? To recognize, okay, there is a difference between I am bad and I did something that was bad or that wasn't good enough. And to learn how to, because shame is generally unproductive. If I think I'm not good enough, then there's not a lot of motivation. There's not a lot of, it doesn't really become the fuel of my academic comeback. Instead, if I say I am good enough, I just didn't show up in the right way. I just did not control the controllables well enough to have this success. Now it's like, okay, well, very clearly there is something that I can do, and it helps to become that fuel. I'd say that's the first thing. I think the second thing that I would say is that it's okay to let yourself feel the feeling. So one technique that I love, which I learned from a parenting book, is AVP. So acknowledge, validate, permit. And so it's where I acknowledge my feeling. I say, okay, I am feeling a lot of shame right now. I am feeling pretty awful. I am feeling really inadequate. And then V is validate. So say, why does it make sense that I feel that way? It makes total sense because I literally put everything. I had told all of my friends, I had told all of my professors, I had told everyone that I wanted to go to Princeton. I wanted to be the first person in my high school ever to get into Princeton University. And I failed in a very, very, very public way. And so of course, I'm going to feel awful. Of course, right? That's the validate. And then P is permit. And that's where you learn how to separate those feelings from your actions, right? Your feelings are not your destiny. Your feelings are just your feelings. And so I would say something like, you know what? Yes, I failed. I feel inadequate in a very, very public way. However, I still have a choice of how it is that I respond to this. I can still turn this into something meaningful. I can still use this as the fuel for my academic comeback. And to give you a little more context, I ended up, not only did I score in the top 1% on the MCAT, I ended up getting to Stanford Medical School, which I had no preconceived notion that was even possible when it is that I entered college. And then after I got 0.1%, and scored in the top 0.1% on the USMLE Step 1, I then got into Harvard MGH for residency. And so again, your story is just beginning. The next question is, what if I failed multiple times already? This is a great question. So I think Einstein said, insanity is doing the same things again and again and again and hoping for different results. And so if you failed multiple times already, again, it's not evidence that you are a failure. However, it is evidence that there is something that you need to change. You can't just keep doing the same thing and convince yourself that somehow you're changing and just hope that magically the results are going to change. You really do have to look very deep inside yourself and say, okay, what is it that I'm doing wrong? And oftentimes that means you're going to have to seek outside assistance. Maybe you go to a friend who's really, really good at this and you have to humble yourself in front of them and say, you know what? I'm doing something wrong. I really don't know what it is. Can you please help me? I honestly don't know what it is that I need to do. And maybe you need to do that 3 or 4 or 5 times. One of the hardest things to do when you failed, and especially when you failed multiple times, is to go to someone else and be vulnerable. I think for all of us, being vulnerable in general is hard, but especially if you're like me and you had that feeling of inadequacy, of I'm just not good enough, and this is now evidence that supports that, it's extremely difficult to go to someone else and to say, you know what, I don't know what it is that I'm doing. Can you please help? That said, there was a quote from Memoirs of a Geisha, the book, and eventually a movie, where it was something like, adversity is like a strong wind, and adversity tears away from you pretty much everything, all of the masks that we wear, all of the pretensions that we take on, and it leaves with us only the core of who it is that we are. And so the other thing is that when you failed multiple times, you want to remember that the adversity is your wind. It can tear away all of the things that maybe you were successful despite of the fact that you were doing them. And so now you can actually change those things so that your actions can be the reason why you are successful. The next question is, how do you find the right study method for you? Now, it's funny. I get this question a lot, and I think that, like in medical school, you hear this advice a lot, in college, the same thing, and in high school, probably you've heard this, where, oh, you just got to figure out what's right for you. I think that to an extent that is true. I mean, I think that there are techniques that work well for some people and maybe not well for others. But to be honest, the evidence suggests that good study techniques are good study techniques, right? There's not as much variation. Like if you actually look at people who score really, really high on exams, they tend to have very, very, very similar mindsets, very, very similar methodologies, very, very similar beliefs amongst them. They say that people that aren't successful, for 10,000 unsuccessful people, there's going to be 10,000 ways in which that might happen. But for successful people, there's like one way. They actually say that about happy people, right? For unhappy people, there's like 10,000 unhappy people, there's 10,000 different ways to be unhappy. I think that is in many ways true about study methodology. So in terms of study methodology, it actually is quite simple. In order to do well in studying, you have to have a method to learn something well. And learning something well typically means you want to see things from a principle standpoint, and you don't want to just memorize it. The best students I have ever met, all of them had a very deep understanding and a principle-based understanding. They did a study once where they looked at advanced physics students, like grad school level students, and then they looked at beginning, and they would show them different physics problems, like if you shoot a arrow and how long does it take for it, it's like 5 meters above, starts 5 meters above the ground and it's shot horizontally and it's X, centimeters per second, and how long will it take for it to fall and hit the earth? And then there would be another one that's like, you have a ball that's rolling down an incline, and how fast will the ball be moving, and things like that. There's a ball and a spring. They would ask the beginning physics students, they would say, okay, how many problems do you see among these 3 problems? And the beginning students would say, oh, well, there's 3 different problems. There's the arrow problem, there's the ball rolling down an incline problem, and then there is the ball on a spring problem. The advanced students would say, no, actually, there's only 1 problem. All of these are just different forms of potential to kinetic energy, right? They're just really the first law of thermodynamics. That's the first step that you need to find the right study method, is that no matter what it is that you do, you have to have a means of understanding and applying principles. The second thing that you need, if you want to find the right study method, is that you need to have a means of retaining it. Now, for things in high school, for things that are very principle-based, you might not have to do a lot to remember it. Like in high school, I didn't have to spend a lot of time on retention because there really weren't that many principles in physics. However, as I went further and when I went into subjects that required me to have much broader knowledge, like biology, like pretty much all of medical school and residency, I needed to have a means of remembering that. And so for me, and frankly, I honestly think that this is true for 99.9% of the population, you really want to learn how to use spaced repetition. So Anki is a really, really useful way of doing this, but there is just a massive unfair advantage for those of you that actually learn how to use spaced repetition the right way. Most people, again, use spaced repetition the wrong way, which is they break the first rule, which is they're just memorizing things. They just have this regurgitation, and usually they're using flashcards that other people have made, right? But regardless, the second principle of the right study method is that you need to have a means of remembering it. And then the final step is that you have to know how to use it. You have to learn how to apply the information. Because applying it will A, help you remember it better, and B, help you learn it better. And C is the way that for most of the important standardized exams, like AP Physics, AP Chemistry, like the MCAT, like the USMLEs, they're all asking, not can you just regurgitate it, not can you memorize something and just, vomit it on a page, but can you actually understand it well enough that you can use it? Those are the 3 things for your academic comeback, the 3 things that you'll need to do. Learn it well, ideally from a principle, like why does this make sense? Can I make connections standpoint? 2 is make sure that you can actually retain that information effectively. And again, spaced repetition is a fantastic way of doing that. And 3 is that you have to keep practicing actually applying it. The next question is, what if my parents or family are disappointed in me? I still want my parents to be proud of me. If they're disappointed, or if you think that they're disappointed, I think that probably the best way to look at that is to try to reframe it. And instead ask yourself, okay, well, they're disappointed because, well, why are they disappointed? I mean, I can think of it as, if I start from the premise that I'm not good enough, then it's easy for me to interpret that as, that's just further evidence that they're disappointed because I'm not good enough. But instead, if I change that underlying belief, if I change that assumption, that premise, and say, you know what, I am good enough, operate to my full capacity, I didn't control the controllables enough, I can look at their disappointment, if it even is disappointment, because let's be honest, they may not actually be disappointed, they just might be sad for me. They may just see my sadness and that might be reflected. But even if they are disappointed, let's reinterpret that as they believe enough in me that they know that I can do better. and that they care enough about me that they want better for me. The next question is, how long should a comeback take? Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, the way that I looked at it was, this wasn't gonna happen in a day, in a week, in a month, probably not even in a year. And I actually looked at that as a good thing. Because what I told myself was, the most durable changes are the ones that are going to have to take the most time. If I can make a change in a day, it can be unmade in a day. But if this change takes 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, then it is going to be so deep and so rooted that there is going to be almost nothing that is going to be able to take that away from me. And so rather than ask the question, how long should a comeback take? I think it's better to say, I hope that this comeback takes a while, so that when it's happening, you can see that, you can reframe that as, you know what, this is a good thing. The next question is, how do you maintain motivation during the comeback process? Now, there's the difference between extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation means I am doing something where there's some kind of reward or something at the end where that is the reward for my work. Intrinsic motivation is where the activity itself is the reward. So in other words, if I'm extrinsically motivated about studying, I would be studying because I want to get good grades, because I want to get into a good college, I want to get into a good medical school, I want to get into a good residency, right? I would be doing it so that I can have something external. Intrinsic motivation means I am studying because studying itself is the reward. Not because of the grades. I mean, the grades can be nice, but I actually enjoy and look forward to studying. Now, for decades of research, what do you think it is shown? Who do you think does better and enjoys their life more? People that are extrinsically motivated or people that are intrinsically motivated? If you guessed intrinsically motivated, you are 100% correct. If I love what it is that I'm doing, if I love studying, I will study more. If I love studying and I want to do it more, then of course I'm going to be more successful. And being successful in and of itself is honestly pretty fun. And so the question is how can we become more intrinsically motivated during our comeback process? Now, intrinsic motivation, after decades of research, they found that it basically boils down to 3 things. The first is choice, the second is meaning, and the third is competence. So let's talk about choice. When I'm studying, I oftentimes will give myself a choice about how it is that I study. Not necessarily when that I study, right? Because you gotta maintain, ideally you have a routine. In medical school, for example, sometimes I would study in my apartment. Other times I would say, okay, you know what, I gotta mix it up. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna study in one of the empty buildings on the weekend, right? Because no one was working on the weekends and in the research building, so I would just go to one of those buildings that I had access to. Or sometimes I would be like, okay, well, I'm gonna go to the student union, whatever it is. Actually, 2 of my favorite places to study in medical school were, one of them was the IKEA food court, because there was no internet at the time. Now IKEA has internet, but in East Palo Alto, the IKEA there had no internet at the time when I was a medical student. And so I would go there and I would just have no distractions. I could just focus. The other was actually, oddly enough, it was actually McDonald's. Just because it was kind of grounding. Like living in Palo Alto, it's kind of like this bubble, but going to McDonald's, there was a much larger cross section of, I think, society, and so it was kind of grounding for me to go there. So, but I would give myself a choice. The second is meaning, and so just like I told myself, you know what, this is going to be the fuel that will allow me to help other people in the future. Whatever it is that you're doing, you want to ask yourself, how can I give this meaning? What's the purpose behind this? In the Marines, which is one of the most dangerous, one of the most, taxing, one of the most difficult jobs in the world, it actually has one of the highest job satisfactions of any job in the world. It's like the opposite of working for, like big tech in the heyday. One of the things that they would do is that they would ask each other during difficult things, what is it, or why is it that you're doing this? Like, why is it that you're waking up so early? Why is it that you are following the drill sergeant's instructions? And what they would do is they wouldn't say the superficial answer. They wouldn't say, oh, well, I'm doing this because that's just what we're doing, or this is what they told me to do. They would say their deeper purpose, which was, I'm doing this because I want to give my family a better life than I had growing up. Or they would say something like, I'm doing this because I want to be a role model for my son, or I want to be a role model for my daughter. And so whatever it is that you're doing, ask yourself, if you want to have that intrinsic motivation for your academic comeback, You want to ask yourself, why am I doing this? What is the deeper reason behind it? And then the third thing is competence. So competence means the better I get at something, the more it is that I will like doing it. And so one trick that I have found is that if you feel really overwhelmed by a huge amount of material, right, in medical school, oftentimes on these exams that people are failing, oftentimes on these exams, it'll be 2 years worth of material. It'll be 3 years worth of material. And some students are stuck in the bottom 1% and they want to get to the top 10%, right? Massive, massive changes. And it feels like, oh my gosh, so daunting and so difficult. Instead of thinking, okay, how am I going to get through all 3 years worth of material? Just break it down into the smallest chunk you can make it. And so I tell them, just learn one topic. Because if you want to get 80% on everything, just start and get 80% on one thing. Because once you see yourself get that 80% on one thing, and especially if you have a system for remembering it, especially if you have a system for actually using that information like we talked about earlier, once you have that, it becomes infinitely easier for you to motivate yourself. Because to go from 40% to 80% on an entire 3 years worth of material, that's going to take a really long time, right? But to go from 40% to 80% or 90% on just one topic, that ideally should only take you a day. And so that's how it is that you can really build that intrinsic motivation so that you love studying, you love working, you love the grind on your way to your greatest academic comeback. Again, choice, meaning, and competence. If you've been through academic failure or disappointment, I hope that you can see this as the start of the greatest academic comeback that you've ever made in your life. If you want to deepen your motivation and you want to deepen your ability to make that comeback, be sure to check out my next video, The Danger of Active Recall, where I will go through the right and the wrong way to use one of the most powerful study techniques available to you. I'll see you in the next one.